We are back once again at California Auto Works. I've taken my 1973 Dodge Charger with the Mopar 361 big block and I've put it right back on the roller so we can get some more numbers out of this thing. Since the last time I was here, you guys know that I have since installed a turbocharger. We are working with a GT45, an eBay GT45 turbocharger, and we're blowing through a Proform 750 mechanical secondary carburetor. That's dumping fuel into a dual plane intake with a 1-inch carb spacer sitting up on top. This setup is running non-intercooled, and we're currently running at 14 degrees of timing. I've only set up a preliminary tune, so I might not be perfectly on it right now. I have put a few miles on it, and I have made adjustments to it before we got it here, so I think I'm fairly close, but we might have to go in it and do a little bit more. I went ahead and brought all my tuning tools while I was at it. I got my big set of pin gauges. I've got my miscellaneous parts box. I have a little tool bag that I brought just in case. I brought my smaller set of pin gauges, and then I brought a full set of jets. I also brought a set of drill bits that I normally use. So now if we have to open it up, which I'm pretty sure we will, I have everything that I need in order to get the tune all squared away. We're going to be ramping up the ignition timing, so we're going to be controlling that via the CD1 ignition system by JMS Daytona sensors. Our carburetor is a 750 CFM Proform Race Series gasoline carburetor that I've converted into a blow-through carburetor and tuned myself. So we're going to see how well this runs today. As mentioned before, this is a Mopar big block 361 cubic inch motor. The short block is from a 1962 DeSoto that my dad picked out from the junkyard, and the heads are a set of aftermarket, basically stock replacement aluminum heads. Camshaft that's in it is a 480 lift split with a 230 duration split, and everything's on a 109 LSA. The fuel system is taken care of by a Holley 525 liter per hour fuel pump. We're running that up to the carburetor using dash 8 AN lines. Alright, so these are the results of run number 1. We're looking at about 300 pound-feet of torque, and we're looking at a total of 257 horsepower. If you guys seem to remember my last video that we were on the dyno, this car actually made 263, I believe, horsepower, and then like 275 pound-feet of torque or something like that. So then from that session to this session, the engine lost about 10 horsepower, but it gained about 25 pound-feet of torque. Now there's a couple reasons why this might happen. The main reason is because we've eliminated the dual exhaust. This car used to run full-length long tube headers with the 3-inch collector flange, and then from there it ran 2.5-inch exhaust all the way to the back. Since then, we've actually swapped over to a stock manifold and a turbo manifold, so it would make sense that the engine loses power. The next detriment of the horsepower is that we're actually only running 14 degrees of total timing, whereas before we were running anywhere from 32 to 36 degrees. So we've lost ignition timing, we've lost exhaust flow, but we've gained torque, and that's probably because of the turbo. It looks like we're at about 5.6 pounds of boost on the wastegate spring that's in it right now, which is probably the reason why this engine still picked up torque, and the lack of ignition timing and exhaust flow were probably the reason why it lost horsepower. If we're looking at our air-fuel ratios, we start the run with no boost at about 8.8, which is like 13.2 to 1, and we finish off the run at 0.78 all the way to the end actually. So 0.78 is about 11.8 to 1. So from 4,500 RPMs on forward, we start at 0.8, we drop at 0.79, and then we're at 0.78 all the way to the end of the run. So as far as I can tell, my air-fuel ratio is spot on. We're going to go ahead and add some ignition timing and then see if this thing makes some more power. went ahead and added 2 degrees, so from 14 degrees we went up to 16 degrees, and this is how much we've made. So we've got a new chart up here. Our max power actually went up by about 13 horsepower, so we're at 271 horsepower, and our max torque is 223. So that went up about 20 pounds, and that was from just 2 degrees of ignition timing. Our PSI stayed about the same from 5.6 on the last run to 5.4 on this run. And our air-fuel ratio stayed at 7.9. And that around redline, it actually gets a little bit richer at 0.77. But as far as I can tell, everything's still in the safe zone, so we are all good to go. If we look at the mid-range on the air-fuel ratio, I believe we are still at 0.80, which is awesome. And at 3,500 RPMs, which is more or less where we start the run, we're at 0.87, which is a little lean, but at 3,500 RPMs, we're not really building any kind of boost. It looks like we're at 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds, which is nothing for the amount of timing that we have in here. So let's go ahead and add 2 more degrees and see what we got. Alright, so now we are at 18 degrees of timing. We went ahead and added it, and we picked up about 7 horsepower and 5 pound-feet of torque. Like I mentioned before, the air-fuel curve stayed about the same, so no surprise there. And it's probably staying the same because the boost level hasn't changed at all. So we're just adding ignition timing, we're making the engine a little bit more efficient. For all intents and purposes, it should read leaner, but it actually hasn't moved at all, and the power keeps climbing, so it looks like we're all good there. Boost pressure stayed at 5.2, so we actually went down in boost, but we're still making more power. There's also a little bit of run-to-run variance because I am running a mechanical wastegate, and I'm not using any kind of electronic controller, so it's really difficult to control the boost. But so far, we're still in the positives. Let's go ahead and add 2 more degrees of timing. Alright, so we added 2 more degrees of timing, and this time we saw a pretty big jump. We're at 296 horsepower and 340 pound-feet of torque. So definitely a good jump. Looks like the engine really liked this combination. The new horsepower is the dark line, the old horsepower is the light green line. Our air-fuel ratio is still spot on, hasn't really moved at all. And our boost actually dropped even more from 5.7 to 5.3. So it seems that as the engine's getting more efficient, the boost seems to drop off a little bit, which does tend to make sense. Let's go ahead and add another 2 degrees of timing and see what we got. Alright, so right now we are at 22 degrees of total timing. We finally crossed the 300 horsepower mark, so we are at 396 horsepower and 342 pound-feet of torque, and that is at 5.07 psi. So from the beginning to now, we dropped almost a full point of pressure, and it's safe to say that this engine right now is running on 5 psi of boost pressure. Once again, our air-fuel ratio is still dead nuts. We haven't had to touch the carburetor at all since I got here, so it looks like we are in pretty good shape right here. Let's go ahead and add a little bit more timing. We went ahead and added 2 more degrees, so we are at a total of 24 degrees of timing. And it looks like the engine actually lost power, quite a bit of power actually. It lost about 11 horsepower and 1 pound-feet of torque. The PSI jumped from 5.07, where we had it before, to 5.21, which lets us know that the engine became less efficient. The air-fuel ratio actually didn't change much at all, so we're all still fine on the air-fuel ratio. It looks like our total timing is going to stay at 22 degrees. Our air fuel ratio is still where we need it to be. Now it's time to bring up the boost. We decided to try one more thing, and that was to loosen up the connection going into the top hat of my wastegate. What this line normally does is that it allows boost pressure to start opening the wastegate in order to drop boost levels down. If this line is normally not connected, it will cause your boost levels to spike dramatically. What we noticed is that because we realized that we had a 5-pound spring in it, we didn't think that the spring that was in it was going to have that much resistance against the back pressure that we were going to build. So we deemed it, for the most part, safe in disconnecting the top of the wastegate. So that's exactly what we did. We went ahead and disconnected it from the top hat. This is normally where my boost controller would go, and we went ahead and disconnected it here, and this is the amount of power that we ended up making. We weren't seeing too much of a change by unscrewing the wastegate line slowly, so we decided to just take the risk and pull the wastegate line completely off, and that jumped boost up from 5 pounds all the way to 13, almost 14 pounds. We're looking at 13.96 at the high end. If we look at the air fuel ratio, everything seems to be still pretty close, and in fact it actually goes a little bit richer as boost went up to 13.9. Even at the end of the run, we're still looking at 0.78 and 0.77, which is still definitely safe. Horsepower numbers, we are looking at 448 horsepower and 448 pound-feet of torque. So we are finally at 1 for 1. This engine is making pretty close to 450 horsepower. We went ahead and warmed up the turbo a little bit more and went for a second run, and the engine made 451 horsepower and 463 pound-feet of torque. Air fuel ratio toward the end actually jumped up a little bit to 0.80, and at the very end it dropped back down at 0.79. For all intents and purposes, we are definitely still in the safe zone. We're still at about 11.8 to 1 on the air fuel ratio. We went ahead and tried to add 2 more degrees of timing again, but we actually ended up losing power significantly, just like we did last time. We're down to 424 horsepower and 431 pound-feet of torque. So we've pretty much maxed out the boost level. We maxed out our timing. This is as far as we can go without bringing in the boost. Other options to get more power is maybe step up the rocker ratio, go with the bigger cam, get a better intake manifold. There's still definitely more in it, we just have to find it. So our final numbers for the day are 451 horsepower and 463 pound-feet of torque. Stay tuned while we do some more upgrades and start pulling more power out of the big block Mopar, because we're definitely not done yet. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.